Hello, Sandy Drake here in beautiful Sherwood Oaks Park, here to bring you the first of Bloomington's virtual nature sounds. I would like to take a moment to just appreciate our surroundings. Here we have made it through another gray Bloomington winter, and we are graced with spring. The spring ephemerals are popping up, reminding us of all of the wildflowers from last season we had nearly forgotten. The trees have exploded into color, and the spring rains have taken our grass from brown to green to an electric neon green, which is shocking to the senses. You may find yourself out a little bit later one evening, enjoying the world just as it turns blue, and suddenly, hark, you hear them. The bringers of spring, the spring peepers. Now, you may not even know what you're hearing. However, it is a familiar sound to most of us. While most of us have heard the spring peeper, very few of us have actually seen them. So tonight we're going to take a moment to dive into the secret world of the spring peeper. There are 16 varieties of frog and toad found in Indiana. Let's go back to a basic biology here. The difference between a frog and a toad. Well, it turns out the toad is a subspecies of a frog, so you could simply say there are 17 species of frog in Indiana, 3 of which are toad. We have the American toad, we have the eastern spay-toed toad, and we have the Fowler's toad. Today, however, we are going to be focusing on the peeper. There are 2 varieties of peeper. There is the northern spring peeper, that is Pseudocris crucifer, and there's the southern spring peeper, that is Pseudocris bartramiana. Both of them have that telltale cross on their back, hence the Pseudocris, or false cross. Now, visually speaking, the southern peepers are going to have dark splotches on their underbelly, whereas our northern peeper has a nice, smooth, singular color. Otherwise, regionally speaking, you're only going to find those southern peepers on the southern seaboard of Florida, Georgia, or Texas. So fairly easy to actually tell the difference. Now, our peepers come in a variety of colors. They come from tan to brown, gray, to greenish, of course. They have these very attractive bands on their arms. Of course, the telltale cross on the back. The females are going to be larger, as is very common in all of the animal kingdom. The females are larger and a more muted color, whereas the males are going to be smaller, more vibrant, and they have a dark neck. That is to account for the vocal sac that is going to expand as they are calling out for a mate. It is, in fact, only the males that we are hearing tonight. We find ourselves in Sherwood Park, where there are a number of water sources here, and that is exactly what the peeper is reliant upon. They need those spring rains in order to continue their cycles of life. So while they thrive in a more permanent wetland, such as a lake or a pond, a swamp, they will make do in urban and suburban areas in those lower, dense, perhaps in your lawn, that fill up with water, the farm fields that flood in the spring, or even the potholes that fill up with water and don't seem to drain until mid-May, June. That is exactly what our spring peepers are after. So, let's actually take a moment, see if we can find a peeper. Come on. Hi, here we are on the other side of the park now. We've actually gone down into the creek bed and found what is called a vernal pool, or that is a seasonal pool. Now, this pool will not last long. It'll probably take us into June or July, and that is just long enough for our northern spring peeper to complete its reproduction process. Our peepers, as said, are the first to come out of hibernation. So they go into hibernation generally in October, and then that first wintry mix in January or February that feels more like rain than it does snow, that is what's waking them out of hibernation. Lucky for them, their bodies can sustain a freezing temperature. In fact, their internal liquids and fluids can freeze to 17 degrees Fahrenheit. So they do, in essence, freeze while they are alive. They're generally hibernating under logs or tree bark. You wouldn't believe all the species that use tree bark as a hiding place for the winter time. But when that spring rain comes, or rather that wintry rain comes, that wakes them up. As the weather starts to warm up, 1st of March, they begin to congregate in the closest wetlands. They congregate in the hundreds. And as said, it is the males that begin to call out. They have that singular one tone, beep, 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 that they repeat again and again, about once a second. So the greater the population of peepers around a wetland, the more chaotic and urgent their call becomes, until suddenly you find yourself surrounded in a chorus of chaos with hundreds of peepers calling out for a mate. When they do actually find a mate, they retreat to the water, and they exhibit what's called amplexus. Now this is fascinating. That is fertilization outside of the body. So the male attaches himself to the back of the female, and as she is depositing eggs, he is behind her fertilizing them externally. They will do this for up to 1,300 eggs. That is a lot of eggs. They are all laid in just a globular mass. When you see eggs that are in more of a unified string, those are toad or some other amphibian. The frogs lay theirs in just a wild mass, attached to some piece of vegetation for stability, and then often hidden under debris. Those eggs are going to remain eggs only for about a week until they hatch into tadpoles, and at that point they became really something of an aquatic delicacy. Bass, trout, bluegill, any number of fish are feeding on them, as well as so many friends from the sky, the great blue herons and the kingfishers. We even have the diving beetle that's going after these tadpoles. So it is a good thing that mama laid 1,300 eggs. Now the tadpoles grow to be about an inch long, and let it be known that the frog itself is a tiny, tiny frog. The spring peeper is a tiny frog, only about an inch on average. Some of the larger females are going to be an inch and a half, but they only weigh 1/10 of an ounce, which in your hand feels like absolutely nothing. So they're not gaining a lot of length in this metamorphosis from tadpole to frog, but they are gaining a lot of mass and the ability to be terrestrial, whereas before they were, of course, only aquatic. Once they grow into full-grown adult, that is June or July, they become something of a vicious hunter. Now they have these amazing toe pads that are classic of a tree frog. However, they do not use that climbing ability while hunting. They're hunting primarily in that low vegetative grass around the wetland. So what they're after are terrestrial invertebrates. That's going to be spiders, beetles, any number, ants, creepy crawlies, as well as the occasional fly and slug. And then that may beg the question, who is eating them? The spring peeper is a sought-after little delight for any number of snakes, skunks, owls, other birds, and even some larger spiders and frog species. So it becomes a strange and lethal game of tag where what was eating them as tadpoles, they now eat. However, in case of the beetles, but the larger version of them, such as the spiders, will be eating them. So it's just whoever is larger. It's the strange game of tag. Of course, our amphibians are up against a much greater obstacle. You may have guessed it. That is mankind. As it turns out, our amphibian friends are being decimated by not only a loss of habitat annually, our wetlands are slowly being paved away. However, also their skin is entirely water permeable. That means water can pass in and out of our skin, as opposed to our skins that act as a protectant. Our water just rolls off of our skin. They absorb water directly into their bodies, which means they're absorbing any pollutants directly into their bodies as well. Number one chemical probably that they're up against are all of those of the agro-business community. So there was a study done in 2013 of the 7 most commonly used agrochemicals. We're talking pesticides, insecticides, as well as fungicides. It turns out of the 7 most commonly used, all of them were lethal to various frog species. Sometimes that mortality rate was only 20%. Other times, in the case of fungicides, it was 100%. And that was when being mixed and applied as recommended. So you can see another problem that they're facing is that most often their habitats are those flooded farm fields where the contaminants are being directly applied to. The good news is there is a number of things we can do locally to help our amphibian friends out. Indiana can do a lot to help the contamination of our water. Within Bloomington, there's Hoosier River Watch, as well as Adopt a Stream. Both of those you can find more information on the City of Bloomington website. They need volunteers to periodically go out and regulate, check the water, make sure that there aren't any added pollutants or anything like that. Certainly report any dumping you might see illegally, but the number one thing we can do is personal accountability. If you've painted your garage and you have painty water, don't dump it onto the earth. Rather, put it down a drain where it's going to go to the water treatment facility and they can take care of those contaminants, take them out of our water. Same with draining your pool in the fall. This is a big one. Waiting until those additives, those chlorine additives, are at a low and safe enough level. If you can drain it into something that's going to go to the water treatment plant, into a drain, please do so, as opposed to, again, putting it right on the ground where it could enter an aquifer or an aqueduct and immediately go into a wetland, decimating any of the micro and macro invertebrates that might be there. Also, creating habitat. That's something you can easily do in your own backyard if you do have the space. Establishing an area that's sort of undisturbed, that has a water source. You can bring peepers to your own area. So, in essence, I want to say thank you for joining us this evening. I hope next time you hear the call of the wild, you go out, seek it out, see what it is, and happy frog hunting in the future.